Even when you look at Nkrumah, you know, Nkrumah didn't get the class question until after he was overthrown. Lumumba, you know, incredible force, historical force, who had great instincts in terms of the class question. Because what were the forces they were dealing with were neo-colonial forces put in place by imperial power. That's why we say the relationship between class and race is colonialism. That's where the real class question is concentrated, in the colonial question. And that was the question that Lumumba and Nkrumah and Sobukwe and Garvey, all of them were raising that question, which pushed them in the front of the class, you know, the struggle of the emancipation of the African working class and poor peasantry. So I agree. This is a struggle that we have to take on, and in a real serious way. And the class question is really important, and it's one that Africans have run from a long time, because that's one of the things, the Pan-Africanists, we will have some struggle with, because we're all African, we're all black, etc., and they don't want to deal with the issue of what that means in terms of the emancipation of our people, because taking power obviously ain't enough, is it? Because all over Africa, you see neo-colonial regimes in place, but there has been no social transformation, no transformation that benefits the masses of our people. So we're not just talking about taking power, we're talking about the African working class taking power as a united force, you know, throughout the world. Uhuru. Anybody else? Any more? Oh, we'll see. Are we cool now? No questions, nothing on the internet or anything else? Let me just say that in repeating, I'm going to give it to Sister Aisha. Oh, okay, good. Okay. Like, the issue of class, the PAC, one of its big problems was the lack of esteem that it held for itself. It always saw the ANC as the real thing, and themselves as, you know, sort of, you know, and that was, I think that had to do more with class too. That they had a certain respect for the petty bourgeoisie and no respect for themselves. And they would complain that the ANC was having this kind of event, that kind of event, and they wouldn't invite them and wouldn't let them be on the platform. I've heard Negroes who are nationalists in this country, you know, make the same kind of complaints, that this well-funded entity would do something, wouldn't let them participate, when, you know, you don't need the ANC to have you on their events. If you understand the significance of who you are, you build events and then hope the ANC wants to be on your event. They could never, ever define the contradiction between themselves and the ANC as class. They could never see the ANC's position. I mean, I'll never forget, you know, here's Nelson Mandela, this old, lying, you know, fellow who was so beloved by every liberal and his grandmother, who stands up before this colonial court after his arrest and makes this statement that all my life, he said, I have been opposed to black oppression and white oppression. Well, damn, buddy, when were you ever had a situation to be opposed to black oppression? You know, I mean, it's just ridiculous. But he was singing a song, you know, that he was telling, look, boss, I'm not a problem. That's what the statement he was making to the court really was, that I'm safe. You know, you don't have to worry. I'm not just against white oppression. I don't want black people to be oppressive either. And if you remember Mandela's statement, he said the biggest problem that we have in South Africa today is black expectations and white fears. This is the problem. This is the contradiction. white fears and black expectations. Here you are, you're supposed to have come to power. You're supposed to have had a successful revolution, and the problem is what you expect as a consequence of that, and the fears of those whom you have dethroned. It's a class question, and we have to make that struggle. Comrade. Uhuru.
There was a question that came in earlier. There's a question that came in earlier from England, from Parliament, recent, to make sure it got asked. It said, I find the identity question is one of the most difficult to understand and address, although it may seem quite simple at first glance. One of the questions that come up all throughout the work is around the question of an African identity based on race, when there's been so much interracial or international mixing. I don't know the best way to put this. It says also that
Copulation. Go ahead, comrade.
Also that on the continent of Africa itself, there are people who would not necessarily be described as black, and across Europe, the Americas, Australia, and Asia, where there are remnants of African exploration from before the birth of transatlantic slavery and capitalism. Some even view the concept of a nation as problematic as they view nationalism as negative, but we are not nationalists as such. What is our response to these type of questions? Some of the struggles around this question take place even within the party, not just the masses, so I would appreciate it.
I think those are important questions. That's why we say we're not race nationalists. Our objective is first of all, the recognition that we are a nation that's dispersed around the world. We ain't no damn race. We are a nation. And that we have to be about uniting and liberating and uniting the African nation itself. In Europe, when you look at the advent of the European nation, nations don't just pop out of the sky, what we refer to as nations today. That there is a material basis for the development of what we call the European nation, not French or German nation, but the European nation. And the material basis of the development of what we characterize as the European nation is the fact that it was born along with capitalism. The development of the European, the emergence of the European nation makes itself present at the same time as the emergence of capitalism. And what is significant about that is that before the advent of capitalism in Europe, there existed what? Somebody say it. As a social system. Feudalism. And under feudalism, the masses of people were dominated by the feudal state. The serf tied to the land couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. Then with the Europeans going out and enslaving people and capturing resources around the world, coming back to Europe, it began to transform Europe, giving rise to the emergence of capitalism. And it also was something that was done by Europe at the expense of Africans and other people. Before the advent of colonialism, and then slavery, and then capitalism, there was no such thing as Europe or Europeans. It was no such thing, it didn't exist. The people who we now refer to as Europeans define themselves primarily in relationship to each other. So you had the Goths and Visigoths and the Celts and the Saxons and all these people who were constantly at war like with each other. They define themselves not in relationship they define themselves primarily in relationship to each other. They didn't see themselves as one. Even when you look at some of the states, the organizations in Europe today that people refer to as nations, like France or like Germany, or like England, these entities were not cohesive like that. They didn't even, some places, they didn't even speak the same language. The ruling class in France didn't even speak the language of the ordinary people in France. The ordinary people in France didn't speak French. And there's this famous quote from this guy from Italy, from the 17th century, I think it was, either 17th or 18th century, where he says, we have now created Italy. We have created Italy, now we must create Italians. So the nation didn't exist. You had all of these Europeans out there. What was it that led to the existence of what might be characterized as, what we characterize as a European nation? First of all, it was the looting and slavery that led to Europeans, or people we call Europeans, defining themselves primarily not in relationship to each other, but in relationship to us. This is the invention of the white man, who was created based on, became the antipode, if you will, of the black man, of people who they've defined as black. They created these definitions. The European nation came about because at the end, with all of these resources coming to Europe, the people who are now laboring in Europe have to be free to sell the value of their labor power. Feudalism and the structures of feudalism won't work anymore. Are you with me on this? Under feudalism, they're all tied to the land. They can't leave the land. They can't go and sell their labor power. They're tied to the land. Now, the requirement for European development is that these people tied to the land have to go to work in the growing factories and enterprises being created through, as a consequence of slavery and colonialism. They have to be able to be, you got to get them off the land. And this led to what some people call as, referred to as, incorrectly, even Marx, primitive accumulation, because it led to what they call the land enclosure acts that pushed the peasants off of the land, and so that they were available to build the ships and build the housing and new communities that they had to organize to facilitate slavery and brigandage around the world. So if they are not controlled by the feudal estates, if the population is no longer controlled by the feudal estates, by the feudal state, what is it then that's going to make the ordinary European, the person that we now refer to as European, loyal to this, to the system? What is it that's going to make the European loyal to the system? My country, 'tis of thee. It's patriotism. You get a flag where you used to have to force them to go out and fight against other people for the landlords. Now they get in front and they pick up the gun and sacrifice their lives and kill other people in the name of country. So that the nation, the creation of the nation under capitalism was a prerequisite for the development of capitalism itself, for the forward movement of a social system. I don't know if I'm clear. So at the same time, however, that this thing of consolidating, and it's not, and I want to make this clear, the European nation, because you had all kinds of discussions and struggles around this. People refer to, I think, the 18th century as, is it the 18th century or 19th century as the era of nation building in Europe. And, you know, and this was a big debate that was happening in Europe. What is a nation, et cetera, et cetera. And the most popular definition of the nation that people became familiar with was the one that Stalin put forth from the Soviet Union. And he laid out certain criteria of what it is that defines a nation. And he said, if any of these, I think, 5 elements is missing, then you don't have a nation. Common language, common territory, land, I think culture and history. What else was it? That common economy. There are about 5 different elements. Now, everybody, all of the progressive adopted Stalin's definition of what it takes to create a nation. But Stalin wasn't even original, because this was a debate, and Stalin simply took portions of arguments that had been put forward by different forces defining the nation. They had a problem to solve. Europe had a problem to solve, and that's how the European nation emerged in history. But think about this. We say that the European nation came about as a part of the process of raping Africa, right? Of the primitive accumulation, as they call it, that came from the attack on China, all these other people, on all of the Americas. Just think about this. All of the Americas where there were no borders before the Europeans got here. And these false borders created there throughout the Middle East, etc. So what you had was two related things that I think is amazing. Is on the one hand, you had the consolidation of a European identity and sense of sameness. Now, where it used to be the Celts might have an antagonistic understanding of their relationship to Saxons or something, now you got a sense of sameness that emerges between Europeans. A sense of sameness, not to say they don't have some struggles, they do. But hell, me and my wife do. And that's not the fundamental aspect of their relationship is not struggle. It is their unity with a parasitic world economy. And so, a sense of sameness that comes from defining themselves in relationship and opposition to this Africa, particularly Africa and African people, because that's where you get the white man from. You get the white man from Europe defining themselves in relationship to what they characterize as black people. And Europe, so the European nation is founded from that, a sense of sameness, free white and 21. I even saw a movie, an old movie yesterday, where this woman talking to her lover was saying that I'm free, white, and 21. You understand? So you get a sense of sameness there. And that's not a simple thing. It's more than what most people realize. When you go to England and hear about the gollywogs, know what a gollywog is? It's the black Sambo thing that you see. It's in America. It's the Zwart Piet that you see in Holland. There is a united process that consolidated this sense of sameness and identify of folk that we see in Europe. But that's not enough. The other thing is a material basis for this nation issue. And the material basis of it is the parasitic world economy that benefits all of them. That is what makes it easier to be white. And that is the crisis today is what makes it easier for Larry King's 8-year-old son to say that I want to be black. Because there's a shift in the power, relations in the whole world today, and this is real. And so we're saying that it was in the process of solving the problem that prevented the progress of the development of European capitalist society that it was necessary to have the emergence of the nation. So you don't have to have somebody with a gun or a whip saying that, you just got to stay on the land. You don't have to worry about them once they leave the land, whether they're going to maintain their loyalty to the ruling class. They maintain their loyalty to the ruling class through that rag that they call the flag, through the symbols that they have, through the Easter holidays, through the Christmas holidays, to all those other things that can help to create a unity of consciousness and a sense of sameness. That's what happens. And then, of course, is rest upon the pedestal, yes, it rests upon the pedestal of a parasitic world economy. So now you talk about Africa. You're talking about this national consolidation happening as a consequence of the fragmentation of the solidarity and identity of other peoples around the world. So that where we once occupied a land mass on that we now refer to as Africa, and logically, just think about this, logically, to have an economy, is it logical to you that Africans who live in Guinea would have a closer relationship to white people in France than they would with Africans in Sudan or Congo or South Africa? That is illogical. It's because of an intervention by an imperial power that disrupted our ability to unify. In fact, it was logical, but just in terms of the development of economic life, that the economic unit gets greater and greater, based right there on that land mass of Africa. But it didn't happen. And so instead of having a consciousness of ourselves as a single people, now we are Haitians, Jamaicans, Ghanaians, Sudanese, Somalis, all these other kinds of things that we are as a consequence of the fracturing, the attack, like on our Africa, on the material basis for our unity, etc. So, here's where we are as revolutionaries, African internationalists. Part of our mission as revolutionaries is to consolidate the African nation itself. Now, the European nation, at this point in history, it could change, but up until now, the European nation is defined by two things. One, whiteness and Christianity. The European nation, up until now, is defined by two features, whiteness and Christianity. Because the European nation itself was consolidated, struggling against Islam, used to be referred to as what? Christendom. Christendom. That is a part of the struggle against Islam, crusades and all of that, and the conquest of Africa and African people. And so you can be as white as you want to be up to now. But if you let somebody know that you ain't a Christian, or you can be a quote-unquote atheist and still be a part of the Christian nation, but you can't be a Jew and you can't be a Muslim, because that's why as much as the Turks kiss the asses of any European the Turks can find to put a lip lock on their asses, the Turks would do it, trying to be granted entrance into the European nation. But they won't do it because of Islam. Not yet they won't. And just the same thing is true with Jews, which is one of the reasons those white people died in them camps in Germany and other places. That's one of the reasons why those white people died, because they can't be a part of the nation yet. We don't know how unfolding events will change what it takes for the survival of this thing that we call Europe now. We saw that in the beginning, Europe, to move forward and progress, had to consolidate itself. Used to identify themselves as these little individual pockets of ethnic groups and stuff, but it wouldn't work for what had to happen. So now they define themselves, the nation is now this larger entity that they define in relationship to the rest of us. So here you got Europe rescuing itself and moving forward as a consequence of that. But what about us? This is where we talk about the African revolutionaries. We have a responsibility to solve the problems of the revolution. And part of the problem of the revolution is our dispersal. It's what has happened to Africa and how they've carved it up and how Africans have been dispersed all around the world. And even black people who live in Australia, in the Pacific Islands and other places like that. The fact is that they are not a part of the European nation. The Africans and the people in Australia, they ain't part of the European nation. That's why they murder and brutalize them and create all kinds of offenses against them. And that's why if they bring their butts from the Pacific Islands they come to New York, or they come to London or some other places, they will be treated like outcasts. So our responsibility is to define the nation. Our responsibility is to define the nation. And what we say is that we have to unite the African nation, because we cannot free ourselves as a people in these individual enclaves where we are located. Ain't gonna be no U.S. free black people. Forget about it. Ain't gonna be no Ghanaian revolution that rescues. Forget about it. We've seen that over and over again. What it's gonna take for us to change our circumstances, our place in the world, is to unite the African nation itself. We define that nation. I don't give a damn what Stalin or his cousin or his cat said. We define that nation. That's our responsibility as a revolution. There's some things that we know about the African nation. One thing that we know about the African nation, one thing for sure about the African nation is that black people, you're a part of the African nation. That is an objective truth, whether you understand that or not. We didn't say you were smart. We said you were an African. You might be dumb enough to think that you're a black Brit, but you are an African. You're a part of the African nation. So just because you're a part of the nation doesn't mean you're a smart part of the nation. It just means you're a part of the nation. That's just an objective truth given the world that we live in today. And it's really important to understand that this is not just something that we're just throwing out here, because are the Africans in England Brits? Are they really Brits? Are the Africans in Ireland Brits? Are they really Brits? Even though they will allow us to sit on some parliament or something they have there, we are African people. And the fact is that we will suffer in England, in France, in the Netherlands, and every place else until we consolidate our unity as an African people, and certainly until Africa itself is liberated and united. So that's a fundamental aspect. So we are black people, part of the nation. But not just that, on the continent of Africa itself. So we're not talking about race as the basis of the nation. On the continent of Africa itself, we will find that there are people there are people who live on the continent of Africa who are not black. There are people in North Africa. There are people in other parts of Africa who are not black. But if they can unite, if they do unite, not if they can unite, with the trajectory of the black liberation movement, if they can unite in practice with the emancipation of Africa and the struggle for black power, whether they are Arab or anything else like that, then they can become a part of the African nation. But I'm not talking about those white people in Namibia who right now, you go to Namibia, you go to a major national holiday, the white people don't come out to national holidays in Namibia. They own every damn thing, but they don't show up. When you go to South Africa, I'm not talking about those white people in South Africa who sometimes PAC lets sit on their leadership. I'm saying that people who are really engaged not just in some struggle against apartheid, but in a struggle against the very parasitic political economy that provides privileges, sustenance, identity to white people at the expense of the emancipation and liberation and unification of Africa and African people. That is what it would take to make that happen. So this is, I know we still just touched on the surface of the question, but it is we who define the African nation. And I just want to say that there are subjective factors, one subjective factor, and objective factors. A subjective factor, an objective factor is if you're black, you're part of the nation. And a subjective factor is under circumstances, some circumstances, even if you're not black and particularly if you're in Africa, you can be part of the nation. And I think that's important. And then there are the objective conditions too. The objective material factors have to do with a political economy based on parasitism that sucks the life and blood out of Africa and African people and benefits, you know, this other group. So there's somebody in this room who's going to be able to say that a lot better than what I just said it. But I'm laying out the parameters of what I understand the African nation is about and the struggle is about. And I think it's really important to say that when we talk about the nation, we are talking about a sense of sameness. That's a subjective factor, you know, because we experience that as black people, you know, a sense of sameness. Even Michael Jackson experienced that. That's why he had to use all that bleach and shit so that he didn't feel like he was the same, you know. But I'm talking about why somebody who's living in Germany, who are living in France, whose parents are from, I think, Martinique, after witnessing, what was the hurricane in New Orleans? Katrina. After witnessing Katrina, saying that we got to create our own black ankh so that we can respond to our own contradictions as relying to the Red Cross. And of course we did that, didn't we? That's what APDEP is all about, you know. But I'm saying that here is an African someplace else. I'm talking about in this room. We got Africans, you know, who were born in all kinds of different places around the world. It really blows my mind, too, because we can be in the same place, you know, well, where you from? Well, you know, now you can say that I'm from Panama or I'm from these other kinds of places, you know. But the reality, and it's never been a question before, but all of us, you know, recognize a sense of sameness. And so it's traumatic for some of us. And sometimes we don't want to say that we are the same because we've been so bamboozled and brainwashed about Africa. And we don't want nothing to do with Africa. And so, yeah, but my cousin, you know, my cousin is an Eskimo. You know, my great-grandmama, you know, was an Indian. You know, all that kind of stuff we come up with in order to run from it. But increasingly, as the power of Africa, you know, rears its head on the horizon, you're going to see more and more people identifying with Africa. And more people will jump on the bandwagon to try to kill white power in order to be a part of the African nation. Larry King's son may be one of them. You know. So anyway, that's a part of the. I know there's a lot more that we could say, and if we wanted to, we could spend the next day just speaking to this issue and this question. But we won't do that because I'm going to be relatively disciplined, and people, you notice they're standing looking at me. And I notice you Africans too, because y'all start getting the white mouth. And I know the white mouth is a sign of hunger in Africans, and that if we don't move from here, somebody is subject to try to start the revolution prematurely and misidentify the enemy. So I'll turn it over to Sister Aisha. Uhuru. Uhuru, comrades. Uhuru.